Currently, you are working as a Linux admin or technical support or application support or monitoring some kind of roles, and then you want to switch your career to DevOps. And in that case, how do you start, or what are the areas within DevOps that you should be focusing on, and how you can actually make your existing experience and make the best benefits of it and still move yourself into a DevOps career. So that's what we will talk about in this video. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel, please go ahead and subscribe, and also turn the notifications on so that you would get notification when I upload a new video. So with that, let us get into our today's topic. If you are a Linux admin or tech support, app support, or monitoring, right, if you are working on the operations side, right side of the software development cycle, how you can switch yourself to DevOps. So any software that you manage as a Linux admin or as a tech support guy, right, I mean, it's not just the software that you manage, it's for any software. You can actually classify the software into two things. One is the code and other one is the configurations. And code is something that sit on the left side, right? It is the developer who handle the code development, and most of the time as a support guy or as a Linux admin, you take the code from your developers and you then deploy them with certain configurations that you manage, right? So you are the one who manage things on the right side when it comes to the server management, when it comes to server provisioning, infrastructure creation of the network devices and things like that. And then the software would need certain configuration. For example, some database credentials is something that your software need, so you should provide that information when you run your application in those surveys. So you work somewhere on the right side, and your developer who write the code, they work on the left side. So most of the time you takes care of the configurations part more than you manage the code, right? The code management is up to the developer, and most of the time even testing, you work as a isolated team from developers and QA engineer do take the responsibility of testing, and then they would finally provide you certain artifact, right? These are the stable software that we want to run into your infrastructure. You take them from them and you run them into your infrastructure. So that's what you do, right? I mean, I am assuming that is at least part of the job that you're doing, and if that is true, then this video is for you. And if you want to switch to DevOps, so you always manage the configuration side, the infrastructure part, and even running the software into the production, installing them into the service. Those are the things that you take care. And right, with that assumption, I will tell you how you will move your career to DevOps, keeping your experience a big plus, right? So that's what we are going to do. And so first thing is, try to have an understanding about code and configuration. Any software that you manage, you can think about it like code plus configuration. Developers are the one who write the code, and then you are the one who provide configurations. When I say configuration, I would today I'm including everything that comes on the right side. That would include the infrastructure configuration and also the software configuration. When I say infrastructure configuration, that would mean how many servers that you need to run this particular application, or what is the size, CPU memory size of the machine that you want to provision. And then do you want the machine to provision with a load balancer and then run in a replica mode, or do you have a stateful application that you such as a database applications? Also, basically the infrastructure varies depending on the application that you want to run inside the infrastructure. And apart from that, every software application that your developers have developed, when you run them into your machines, those software might need some configuration, some application configuration that would include probably at a database credential that the application want to talk to. So when you run the application into your server, you provide this information, the database credentials or some SMR provider details, or maybe a big configuration file that your application might want to use, or probably a database schema migration script, or there would be a bunch of things that you run in your production at the time of managing your application inside the infrastructure. So So always try to differentiate your role. You are the one, most of the time you manage the configurations, developers are the one who manage the code, right? So any software can be distinguished as code plus configurations, right? So keep that in mind. And with that, let's go to the next point in today's discussion. How do you relate your job with DevOps? When you start learning DevOps, it's very important, right? That is the second point. It's very important that you have the ability to relate your current job with DevOps and how that can happen. You are working as a support guy, right? You are taking care of the support, deployment, and server management and things like that. So how it is related to DevOps? It is definitely related to DevOps, right? All these operations are managed in a different way, but this problem exists in DevOps, right? Your developer keep on developing the code, and you want to take the code continuously to the service, and this is a continuous process that happens day to day. And in DevOps, this process happens much faster than this. And when it comes to DevOps, you would be working more closely with the developers and QA team. You understand how the developer make the code change, and after the developer made the code change, what are the series of testing and security are, right? Whatever things that the code need to undergo, you understand them, and you also get to see the test reports and security reports, and basically you can actually see a visualizable report about the quality of the code that you are going to run in production. At the same time, you don't need to be an expert developer to do that. Basically you get some visualizable report continuously, and then whatever code change that happens on the developer side, you try to take them as soon as possible to production. And when it comes to DevOps, many of these things are done in a automated way. And also just try to understand the surveys exist, right? And there should be need for you to manage the surveys, but it should be pretty much automated. For example, in a traditional environment, you might be creating the machines manually or by using some script. But when it comes to DevOps, most of the time when you want to provision your infrastructure or create machines, delete machines, provision databases, delete databases, provisioning networking devices, all these things, if you are working as a DevOps engineer, you would be writing code. Not complicated code, but simple code you would be writing. And every time you want to add some 10 machines, you just write a line of code. I need some 10 machines extra. And as soon as you write the code, some system in your company would execute that code, and then your infrastructure change automatically. So most of the time when you work as a DevOps engineer, you don't directly go to your cloud provider and make the changes, or you don't go to your infrastructure providers and update settings change. Those things happens automatically. What you do is you write the code, right? And then some automated system in your company read your code and make respective changes to the infrastructure, right? Or when it comes to the configuration, for example, when you want to run your application in production, you do that a lot, but you do a lot of manual job to do that, right? You do a lot of troubleshooting on the surveys. You figure out what are the errors, you send those errors back to the developers, and then they have to do a lot of troubleshooting and things like that, right? So but when it comes to DevOps, you still do such kind of things, but in a better way. So for example, again, you would be most of the time writing the code. You would, even the configuration that I talked about, that would include the application configuration or infrastructure configuration, you would be writing the code, right? For example, this is the database credentials, and you write that together inside some form of code that would include different data that your application need at the time of deployment. You just put them together, and then that information is deployed automatically when a deployment happens to your environment. So if I tell you one example, your developers are writing the code, right? They are writing the code of a given application, and they want to send out an SMS, and then for that they want to use an SMS provider, and the SMS provider supports some APIs and stuff. So you have necessary API keys, and you know the provider URL, and then when this application start running in production, the application need to get this additional information, right? So how do you provide that information when you're on the application in the server? If you're working as a DevOps SRE guy, you would rather write them all together as code, and then some system in your company would read it and make the deployment automatically, right? So you won't be doing a lot of manual work. The point what I'm trying to make here is that DevOps is different. The way how you work once you move to DevOps, you would not be working in the way that you were working before. You won't be doing a lot of troubleshooting. Most of the time, when an error happens, you just replace your instances instead of troubleshooting them and fixing them, right? So a lot of differences are there in the work culture, but the work is same, right? So what you need at the end is a reliable production infrastructure and a reliable software your customers are able to use it, right? Those concepts never change in software industry. So always remember, whatever work that you're currently doing is relatable with DevOps. Once you started working on DevOps, the way how you do it might be different, but the work is always relatable. So when you pick your DevOps role, do not pick a role that does not match your existing profile. For example, infrastructure is a profile that fits you, and there are a lot of problems that DevOps try to solve when it comes to the infrastructure side, the deployment side, or the monitoring side. There are a lot of improvements that DevOps bring, and basically just try to learn them, and you will learn them fast because these are the daily things that you do manually, and you do a lot of automation when it comes to DevOps, and probably work with a slightly different culture than what you used to work before. So just try to work on relating your existing work with the problem that the IT industry is facing, and focus on those areas within DevOps where you would be perfect at, right? So that is how you can actually, whatever experience that you gained over your career, you can use them all together when you move yourself to DevOps, right? So always find the right balance between your current job profile and the tools and technologies that you want to learn, right? That's very, very important. And now once you established a relationship between your current profile and the DevOps profile that you want to move into, then that's the time you pick up the tools that you want to learn. So for example, if you want to learn about infrastructure, that is the third thing that I'm talking about, learning the right tools. So if you are an infrastructure background guy, learn tools such as Terraform, CloudFormation. There are a lot of tools that are available today which allows you to write your infrastructure as code. And then basically, that way when you write the code, you can track the code. You can track today's code and you can track tomorrow's code. Today you are running a version of your software that is 1.0.0. Tomorrow you might want to upgrade the software to 1.0.1. And if you are writing the code, you are actually not only making changes to your infrastructure, you are also tracking them down in your code. So the code what you are writing can be interpreted by different tools. Basically, you can write an entire infrastructure as code, and Terraform can take your code and provision a complete infrastructure in your cloud provider, right? So it can do that, right, without any manual efforts. So you can always duplicate your work without taking any effort to do that, right? So just try to learn tools such as Terraform, CloudFormation, or whatever that fits you, and it should be some infrastructure as code that you should learn, and also configuration as code. If you are using traditional environment, you can use things such as Ansible for config management, or if you are using containers, just try to learn Kubernetes. Kubernetes is an awesome tool which by its design, it forces you to write the code. Not complicated code, very simple YAML file is what you are writing, but it allows you to write the code in the simplest form as possible. So whatever configuration, some of them would include the infrastructure configuration such as number of replicas and how you want to scale your applications, right? If more traffic is coming, how you want to scale. All these things you can write as code, or your application needs some configurations. For example, a database credentials that you want to provide to your application, you can still write as the code. So most of the things Kubernetes by its nature, whatever configuration that you want to write, you can write them as code, and then rest of the things Kubernetes takes care. So just pick up the right tools that solve the same problem what you are experiencing in your current profile. So to give you some example, Terraform is an awesome tool. Kubernetes is something that you can use for a multiple purpose, running your application as containers in production, and at the same time solve most of this, right, automatically restart applications, scale applications, and many things Kubernetes can do. Kubernetes has internal mechanism to do such kind of things. So Kubernetes would be one right tool to do it. And then to simplify Kubernetes, you can use tools such as Helm or Customize. These are tools that you can use for simplifying the Kubernetes configuration in much more simplified way. And just focus on the tools that helps you do the same work that you used to do before, but in much better way. So those are the tools that you should pick to learn if you are coming from an admin background, right? And then I will talk a little bit more about infrastructure deployment and monitoring. And I think I already have, maybe there is nothing much left to be said. Infrastructure should be managed as code. Any change that you want to make your infrastructure, you want to increase your number of surveys from 1000 to 2000 in production, it should be a line of code that you should be modifying. You just write in a file, I want to change the number of server from 1000 to 2000, and save that code in some Git repository or somewhere, and then automatically some tools that you have set up in your company would read this latest code that you written and then automatically update your infrastructure. Maybe that would mean creating 100 or 1000 extra machines in the cloud. Or you want to upgrade your software applications to the latest versions, again that should be a code. Or any kind of configuration change that you want to make, you just write them as code, and then different tools in your company would read your code and then make changes accordingly. And even when you do a deployment, right? Next, let me talk about deployment, how you do a deployment. Most of the time when you work as a Linux admin, you take the stable code from the developer would do a lot of testing, QA engineer will do a lot of testing, and finally they would build stable executable code of your applications. You take them and you run them across various machines. That's most probably how you do the deployment. But when it comes to DevOps, deployment is a continuous process. It happens every time developer make a change. Some automated system takes the code from the developer, whatever test the code need to undergo, or whatever security scanning, whatever build process, whatever deployment process the code need to undergo, it undergo automatically, and then automatically the code become ready to go to production, and maybe with click of a button you take the code to production. So when it comes to DevOps, when you talk about deployment is a continuous process, and you should also start thinking from the developer's angle. Think a little bit from the left, right? Just what are the different process the code need to undergo until the code become available to production. So try to avoid the gap between you and the developers. That's very important. If you are coming from a Linux background, there is already a pretty big gap, because developer develop the stable code and tell you, hey, this code is stable, take it to production, and then you do that, right? So, and nobody has a clear understanding about how each other is that. That should not be the case when it comes to DevOps, right? Deployment is more like a continuous process where everyone work together and continuously take the modified code to production through some automated process and systems, right? So that difference is always there. So figure out, there are tools such as Jenkins and then Circle CI with Tecton, various tools depending on if you are using Kubernetes, maybe you can choose Tecton. That's a good tool to do such kind of job. Or if you are using traditional tools, Jenkins is an awesome tool, or Azure DevOps. There are different CI/CD tools available today that you can learn. Learn only one of them. Don't learn everything, but one of them, and try to implement this CI/CD process so that you understand how deployment works when it comes to the DevOps side, right? And then monitoring. Again, monitoring is also something it's not a one-time thing that you develop. So when it comes to DevOps, you take your software much faster to production. You have to make changes to your monitoring systems also continuously. So most of the time, even the monitoring systems should also be capable of reading the code that you write. So you write the code, what are the new softwares that you bring in, and what are the extra monitoring that should be added, or there are a bunch of things that you again continuously update. So every time software get released, you might also be releasing some monitoring systems as well at the same time. So generally deployment process of in a DevOps world, it means you are not only deploying the latest code, you are deploying the configurations, you are deploying the changes in the monitoring systems, you are deploying whatever that you want the production to change. You deploy them at one shot, and that is okay in DevOps, right? Most of the time, if you are working as a Linux admin, maybe sometimes you do a config release alone, sometimes you do a code release alone, or sometimes you do both. But when it comes to DevOps, deployment does not have a lot of complicated meaning. Deployment in DevOps normally means taking everything to production. That would include the changes in the code, changes in the configuration, changes in the monitoring, maybe all changes or maybe one of the change, right? It could be a very small configuration or a very small patch update, right? Basically, deployment process in DevOps is pretty much simplified and straightforward. So just try to understand those differences when you work as a Linux admin and when you move to DevOps, what change, and then learn those tools that you already are working on, right? I mean, I'm not saying the tools, I'm just saying the work is same, the problems are same, the way how you work only changes if you focus on the right domain within DevOps, right? Do not focus on try to become a security expert if you are not from a security background, or do not try to become a developer if you are not from a developer background. You don't have to, right? You can always, within DevOps is a huge domain, you can always find the right tools that matches your tool, and there are always things that you need to extra. For example, in DevOps you work with your developers more closely than when you work as a Linux admin or tech support guy. So a lot of things changes. So try to understand the work culture of DevOps and a lot of changes, right? Most of the time when I take training, I have noticed that the Linux admin always have the mindset of troubleshooting things. If there is an error, they want to know what is that error, right? I mean, that should not be the mindset when you're working as a DevOps engineer. I mean, it might sound rude and it might sound... I was once a Linux admin and I can tell you the difference. I mean, even I used to be somebody who loved to troubleshoot things, right? It feels awesome when you find a problem and you spend a lot of time to troubleshoot and fix it. It feels awesome, but that time has changed. That time is past, right? So you don't do that anymore. You just continuously make the code stable and run it in production. If there is an issue, fix them, roll back, right? Those are the things that you prioritize, not troubleshooting and fixing the surveys. So, I mean, I'm just saying one of the examples. So there are a lot of things that you should teach yourself, make your mindset change, and try to adapt what DevOps is. I mean, that you can only do by speaking to the people in the same industry who are working on DevOps, and then try to understand how they are doing it and why they are doing it, right? Why they are not doing a lot of troubleshooting, why they are not just depending on the developer to create the stable code, why they are not only depending on the QA team to do the testing, why they all are working together, what is the reason and what helps them when they work together, right? So that you should understand clearly. By talking to different people, you can do that. So that's pretty much I want to talk about. So this video is for you if you are from the Linux or tech support, application support background. I hope this will help you start your career in DevOps, and also subscribe to this channel. I would be posting more videos like this, different videos to help you transit to DevOps, or I would also add some real-time projects and different things, right? So just keep subscribed to this channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, please go ahead and subscribe. And that's pretty much I wanted to talk about. And please support this video if you by liking it, right? If you think it helped, right? So, and that's pretty much I wanted to talk about, and I'll see you next week with a new video. So till then, bye bye.